What if the quietest man on the plane turned out to be the one holding all the power? Flight 327 was supposed to be a routine trip from New York to Chicago. Passengers filed into first class, sipping coffee, scrolling through phones, expecting nothing unusual. But when one entitled traveler looked at a black man in a simple hoodie and declared, "Get out of my seat," she ignited a storm no one could have predicted. Who really decides who belongs in first class? What happens when prejudice collides head-on with quiet dignity, and how can one moment of humiliation transform not just an airline, but an entire industry? This is the true story of Isaiah Carter, a man who sat calmly in seat 2A while the world judged him, recorded him, and underestimated him. But within hours, the entire narrative flipped, and millions watched as justice unfolded at 37,000 feet. Stay with us, because what began as a personal insult became a global movement. Before we dive in, don't forget, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the moments that change everything. The first-class cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight 721 gleamed under the fluorescent lights, polished leather seats lined neatly in rows, a quiet hum from the jet's ventilation filling the silence. It was early morning at Newark Liberty International, and most passengers were still shaking off the heaviness of dawn. Some were scrolling through their phones, others burying themselves in emails or sipping burnt coffee from the Gate Cafe. Isaiah Carter had boarded without fanfare. He wore a faded hoodie from his alma mater, dark jeans, and sneakers that looked broken in from years of travel. Nothing about him screamed power, though inside that calm exterior was a man who carried enormous weight. To anyone watching, he could have been just another traveler with too many miles logged. Only a select few knew he was the chief executive officer of Horizon Atlantic Airlines, the very company operating this flight. He eased into seat 2A, a window seat near the front of the cabin. The view out the small oval window offered little gray tarmac, service trucks zipping by, ground crew guiding baggage carts. Isaiah placed his leather messenger bag beneath the seat in front of him. It contained carefully organized folders, his laptop, and a personal notebook he never traveled without. He slid his phone into the cup holder on the armrest. The morning calm lasted all of 30 seconds. A sharp click of high heels echoed down the aisle, drawing attention. Victoria Hale, dressed immaculately in a navy blue pantsuit and clutching a designer handbag, stopped at row 2. Her face twisted into a look of disbelief. "Excuse me," she said loudly enough for surrounding passengers to look up. "You're in my seat." Isaiah looked up slowly. His eyes, steady and unreadable, met hers. "Seat 2A." "Yes, 2A." Victoria snapped, her voice clipped. Without waiting for his response, she reached down, grabbed Isaiah's messenger bag, and with a swift, almost violent motion, hurled it down the aisle. The leather bag burst open on the carpet. Papers fanned across the floor like startled birds. His phone skidded several feet, spinning to a stop against the base of seat 3C. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Isaiah didn't move at first. He sat frozen, processing the humiliation that had just unfolded so suddenly, so publicly. Victoria planted herself in the aisle, chin lifted high, the glint of her watch catching the light. "I fly this route every month. I know who belongs in first class, and it isn't you." The words hung in the air, poisonous and heavy. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. One man in 1B coughed, looking down at his tablet as though pretending not to notice. Another woman in 3C leaned forward, curiosity written all over her face. Slowly. Phones began to lift, screens glowing as people prepared to capture what was quickly spiraling into a spectacle. Isaiah drew in a deep breath. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the sting of anger pressing against his composure. A part of him wanted to snap back, to tell her exactly who he was and watch her arrogance crumble. But another voice, quieter, wiser, echoed in his mind. It was his father's voice, reminding him from childhood arguments on playgrounds. Don't let their ignorance decide your reaction. Hold your ground with dignity. Power isn't loud, it's steady. So he stayed seated. Victoria, mistaking his silence for weakness, stepped closer. Her heels pressed down on the edges of his scattered papers. Look, there's obviously been a mistake with reservations. These things happen. But this is my seat. You should probably move to coach before this becomes embarrassing. Isaiah finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. Ma'am, I believe this is seat 2A. Let me see your boarding pass, she demanded, reaching for the slip in his hand. Before she could grab it, a young flight attendant hurried down the aisle. Emily Ross, her blonde ponytail swaying, inserted herself between them. Her training was evident in her calm tone, though her wide eyes betrayed unease. Ma'am, please step back. I'll verify both passes. We'll sort this out. Victoria scoffed, arms crossing. I don't see why my ticket needs verification. I've been flying Horizon for years. I have elite status. I know my seat. Passengers began whispering louder. A man in 3B lifted his phone, thumb hovering over the record button. Another passenger muttered just loud enough, "This is getting uncomfortable." The moment fractured further when Isaiah's phone buzzed from the floor, its lock screen lighting up with a notification. A message from his executive assistant flashed briefly. Board meeting moved to 9:00 a.m. Sorry for the short notice. The words were plain, but for a sharp observer, the significance was clear. Isaiah wasn't just any passenger heading to Chicago. Victoria caught sight of the scattered folders and smirked. See, he's clearly traveling for work. Companies always shove their employees in cheap seats and hope for upgrades. This isn't personal. It's just reality. Her tone dripped with something darker than annoyance. It was condescension sharpened by prejudice. Emily crouched to help collect Isaiah's belongings. As she stacked the folders, her eyes caught a flash of platinum. She froze for half a second. It was an elite status card, one of the rarest in the airline. Her expression shifted subtly, but she said nothing yet. Meanwhile, the man in 3B finally pressed record. The live stream counter ticked upward, 138, 242, 389 Victoria. Sensing the phones aimed at her, raised her voice as though addressing a jury. I'm not being unreasonable. I just think there's been an honest mistake. Surely we can clear this up. Some people need to understand how airline etiquette works. Isaiah closed his eyes for a brief moment. Inside, a war raged. One side urged him to end this with a single sentence, "I own this airline." The other side told him patience could turn this from personal humiliation into something larger. He opened his eyes again, steady, controlled. Passengers leaned in, waiting for his response. Instead, Isaiah quietly reached for another paper from the floor. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, as though the chaos swirling around him couldn't shake his core. Outwardly, he looked calm. Inwardly, he was calculating. Do I speak now and cut this short, or let it play out? What's the cost of silence? What's the power of restraint? The clock on the overhead departure screen blinked. Boarding complete. Departure in 22 minutes. The hum of whispers grew louder, the glow of phones brighter. What no one yet realized was that this quiet man in the hoodie was not powerless. He was a storm waiting to be unleashed, one that would shake not just the passengers of Flight 721, but the entire airline industry. And it had all begun with a bag thrown across the aisle and a seat labeled 2A. The cabin had shifted from quiet anticipation of departure to a charged silence. Every movement, every word carried the weight of an audience watching closely. The air felt heavy, like a courtroom waiting for testimony. Victoria Hale remained standing in the aisle, her chin tilted as if she owned not only seat 2A, but the entire aircraft. She adjusted her blazer, glanced around, and found reassurance in the attention. If people were watching, she would give them a performance. "I have been flying Horizon for 15 years, she announced to no one in particular. "I know how things work here. I know who belongs in this section. This man does not. There has clearly been a mix-up." Some passengers avoided eye contact, pulling out their headphones or pretending to be absorbed in their screens. Others leaned in, fascinated. The glow from phones grew brighter as more cameras captured the unfolding drama. A young woman in 3C whispered to her husband, "This is starting to get ugly." Isaiah Carter sat still, his hands folded lightly in his lap. His hoodie seemed out of place among the sea of tailored suits and pressed dresses. He felt the weight of every gaze pressing against him, yet his expression remained steady, his dark eyes calm. Inside, however, his thoughts raced. This again. After all these years, after all these titles, I still walk into a space and someone assumes I don't belong. Do I stop it now, or do I let it breathe, let the truth surface in its own time? He replayed his father's lessons in his mind. His father had worked double shifts in Dallas when Isaiah was a boy. On more than one occasion, they had been followed in stores, questioned for no reason, told in subtle ways that their presence was suspicious. His father would always tell him afterward, "The world will try to measure you by the smallest parts of you, your clothes, your skin, your silence, but you get to decide what they truly see. Dignity, son, that's your armor." That memory wrapped itself around Isaiah now. He inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. On the floor, his papers remained scattered. Some bore the Horizon Atlantic corporate letterhead. Others included graphs, charts, and handwritten notes. His platinum status card had slid partly out from under a folder, its silver shine glinting faintly in the overhead light. Emily Ross, the flight attendant, noticed again, and her brows furrowed, though she said nothing. She was caught between policy and instinct, between her duty to diffuse conflict and her recognition that something about this man was not ordinary. "Sir," Emily said gently, "could you please show me your boarding pass? I'll just verify it with the gate agent." Isaiah handed it to her without hesitation. His movements were measured, almost ritualistic, calmness in motion, even when the ground beneath him felt like it was shifting. Victoria leaned over Emily's shoulder, trying to snatch the slip. "Let me see that. I told you, that's my seat." Emily straightened quickly. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. I will handle this." The firmness in her voice surprised even her. For a moment, Victoria blinked, but she recovered, tossing her hair back. "You can check mine, too," she said, digging into her purse with exaggerated indignation. Row 2. Seat A. I sit here every month. I practically live on this plane. The young man in 3B was live streaming now. His screen displayed a growing counter of viewers. 200, 400, over 700. Comments flicked across. This is insane. She's out of line. Record everything. Bet he's right and she's wrong. The atmosphere shifted again, heavier. People were not just witnesses anymore, they were participants, feet in the moment into the endless stream of social media. Victoria smiled at the phone, pointed her way, as though campaigning for sympathy. "I'm not being unreasonable," she said, louder now. "I just think there's been an honest mistake. It happens all the time. People get confused." She glanced at Isaiah and gave him a practiced, sweet smile. "Maybe your seat is in coach. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It really does happen all the time." Her words carried implication. The way she said coach, the way her smile tilted, the way her eyes lingered, they all cut sharper than any outright insult. Isaiah remained quiet. Silence can be louder than shouting. Still, his mind was not at rest. Every time this happens, it isn't just me. It is every young man watching this video, wondering if they will be humiliated someday in the same way. Every business traveler with skin like mine, hoping today is not the day they are told they don't belong. If I speak too soon, this ends as another argument. If I wait, maybe the truth will cut deeper, because it will come from the weight of evidence. Not my defense. He adjusted slightly in his seat, enough to signal presence without aggression. Emily moved toward the front to contact the gate agent for verification. Victoria watched her leave, then turned back to the cabin. She raised her voice again. "I apologize for the inconvenience, everyone. Some people just don't understand how seating works up here. I know this must be uncomfortable, but we'll have it sorted out soon." The businessman in 1A shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. The woman in 3C stopped pretending to read her magazine and openly watched. A few passengers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the undertone of the entire exchange. Then Isaiah's phone buzzed again on the floor. He leaned forward to pick it up, his fingers brushing over the lock screen. A caller ID flashed Horizon Atlantic Corporate Security. He pressed decline and slipped the phone into his pocket. Victoria seized the moment. "See," she exclaimed, pointing. "He's avoiding calls from the airline. They're probably trying to tell him there's been a mistake with his seat. He knows it." The live stream comments exploded. "This is straight racism. Unbelievable. Get her off the plane." Why is this still going on? Isaiah felt the weight of the moment pressing harder now. His jaw tightened. Inside, he wrestled with the impulse to reveal everything, to end this cruelty with a single sentence. But he resisted, holding the silence like a blade not yet drawn. Emily returned moments later with another flight attendant who had been working in economy. She leaned close, whispering, her eyes darting toward Isaiah, then back to Emily. Both women looked uneasy, caught between protocol and the truth slowly dawning in front of them. "What's the hold-up?" Victoria demanded, her voice climbing. "How long does it take to confirm a seat assignment?" She turned toward the other passengers as though they were her jury. "I am so sorry you all have to witness this, but honestly, some people just don't understand etiquette. It's not personal. It's just reality." The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was the silence of people recognizing prejudice, though few had the courage to say it out loud. Isaiah closed his eyes again, steadying his breath. He could feel his heart knocking against his ribs, could feel the swell of anger threatening to break through his calm surface. Yet he forced himself to breathe deeper. Patience. Isaiah. The truth has more power when it reveals itself. Let it unfold. Hold steady. He opened his eyes again, gaze steady, voice still unraised. "I understand your frustration," he said quietly, though Victoria did not hear the steadiness for what it was. She only smirked, thinking she had won, but others heard, and their silence began to shift into something else, into recognition, into witness. The departure board at the front of the cabin blinked again. 17 minutes until scheduled takeoff. The plane was ready. The passengers were ready. But the story unfolding in seat 2A was only beginning. The tension inside the first-class cabin had reached a breaking point. The quiet hum of the aircraft was now layered with whispers, the faint tap of phone keys, and the steady beeping of the departure screen that reminded everyone they were still grounded. 17 minutes had passed, but time seemed to stretch endlessly. Passengers who had tried to bury themselves in their tablets or magazines were now openly watching. The young man in 3B kept his phone raised, streaming live, the counter ticking upward. 1,000, then 1,500, then nearly 2,000 viewers. Comments scrolled too quickly to read. Words like shameful, racist, and record everything filled the feed. Isaiah Carter sat in his seat, his hoodie still zipped halfway up, his hands folded. He looked calm to the outside world, but inside he was engaged in a fierce battle. Every muscle in his body screamed to stand, to demand respect, to end the humiliation with a single revelation. But his mind told him to wait. Power revealed too soon would look like arrogance. Power revealed too late would look like weakness. He had to choose his moment carefully. Victoria Hale was still in performance mode. She stood with arms crossed, one heel tapping impatiently on the carpet, her voice carrying over the rows. "I am not being difficult. I am simply pointing out what should be obvious. This man is sitting in the wrong seat, and I have connections to make. I cannot afford this nonsense." She glanced around the cabin, as if gathering allies. Some passengers looked away. Others nodded faintly. Most stayed silent, the discomfort on their faces betraying what their mouths refused to say. The curtain between first class and economy rustled. A man in a Navy uniform appeared, his radio clipped at his shoulder. His name badge read Daniel Ruiz. Security officer, broad-shouldered, calm eyes, movements slow and practiced. Behind him, a woman in a gray blazer followed, holding a tablet that glowed faintly in the dimmed cabin lights. Her name badge identified her as Hannah Kim, the gate agent. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Passengers straightened, phones tilted higher. This was no longer a petty dispute. Authority had arrived. "Good morning, folks," Officer Ruiz said, his voice level, calm but carrying weight. "I understand there's a seating issue we need to resolve." Victoria immediately stepped forward, pointing dramatically toward Isaiah. "Yes, thank goodness you're here. This man is in my assigned seat. I've been telling your staff repeatedly, but they refuse to resolve it. I cannot miss my connection. I've shown my boarding pass. I've been patient, but this has gone far enough." Her tone was full of exaggerated exasperation, every syllable crafted for the phone still recording. Officer Ruiz nodded slowly, hands resting lightly on his belt, his posture deliberately non-threatening. "All right, ma'am. Thank you. We'll look into this." He turned to Isaiah. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Isaiah moved deliberately, every action slow. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting his ID and boarding pass. His hands were steady, his face composed, though inside his thoughts churned. Do I reveal now? Do I let this play longer? What is the lesson here, and who needs to learn it most? Victoria leaned toward one of the cameras, her voice pitched just loud enough. Finally, some people need to learn there are consequences for trying to game the system. The words landed like stones. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The businessman in 1A, who had remained mostly quiet, now frowned openly, staring at Victoria as though seeing her for the first time. Hannah Kim scrolled quickly through her tablet, pulling up the passenger manifest, her brows knit together. "This is strange," she whispered to Emily Ross, the flight attendant. "His reservation shows multiple entries, different booking codes, but the status level attached to his account." She paused, eyes narrowing. "It doesn't make sense." Emily glanced at Isaiah, then back at the tablet. Something in her gut told her the truth was larger than the screen in her hands. Meanwhile, the live stream numbers climbed higher. 3,000, 4,000. The comments were relentless. "She's exposing herself. This poor man is handling it with so much dignity. Where is the captain?" Isaiah felt all of it pressing on him, the weight of strangers judging, the sting of being humiliated, the echo of his father's words. He closed his eyes briefly. "Hold steady. Isaiah, this isn't just about you. Every time you endure, you make space for someone else. But don't wait so long that the lesson is lost." He opened his eyes, gaze locking with Officer Ruiz. "Of course," he said quietly. His voice was calm but firm, like a river flowing with hidden strength. Ruiz studied him, then glanced at the ID, before he could react. Isaiah's phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with another call, Horizon Atlantic Legal Department. The letters glowed clearly in the dim cabin light. Several passengers saw it. Even Ruiz's eyes flickered. Victoria pounced again. "See, he's declining calls from the airline. They're obviously trying to fix this mistake. He just doesn't want to admit he's wrong." The businessman in 1A finally spoke, his voice low but audible. "Ma'am, that's enough." His words hung in the cabin like a quiet rebuke. Victoria turned on him, her expression incredulous. "Excuse me, you've made your point," he said simply, then looked away, leaving the weight of his statement to linger. The woman in 3C added, almost under her breath but still loud enough to carry, "She's embarrassing herself." For the first time, Victoria's confidence faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed. She turned back toward Officer Ruiz, her arms crossing again, her tone sharp. "Well, are we going to get this resolved, or do we let people just sit wherever they like?" Ruiz exhaled slowly, glancing at Hannah Kim. She shook her head slightly, still scrolling through her tablet, confusion on her face. "It's not adding up," she whispered. "His account has more authority codes than I've ever seen. And his status level?" She trailed off again, eyes wide. Ruiz studied Isaiah one more time. Something in his posture, in the steady calm of his eyes, told him this was no ordinary passenger. The departure board ticked downward. 9 minutes until scheduled takeoff. The cabin buzzed with restless energy. Isaiah leaned back slightly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those closest. "I appreciate your patience, officer. I understand this looks confusing, but I think the truth here is about more than just a seat." Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Sir Isaiah's gaze shifted briefly to Victoria, then back to Ruiz. His voice remained quiet, but the tone had shifted, the edges sharpened with something unmistakable. "Because this is not just about where I sit. It's about assumptions, and sometimes assumptions say more than facts ever could." Passengers leaned closer, phones tilted higher. Even Hannah paused her scrolling to listen. Victoria rolled her eyes, trying to recapture control. "Oh, please, don't make this dramatic. It's a simple seating error." But the tone in the cabin had changed. The audience was no longer leaning toward her side. They were waiting for Isaiah, waiting for the quiet man in the hoodie to speak the words they all sensed were coming. Isaiah looked at his watch, then at the glowing departure board. 6 minutes to take off. 6 minutes to decide how this story would be told. Inside, his heart raced, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. "Officer," he said softly, "I think it's time we brought some clarity to this situation." The silence that followed was complete. Even the phones seemed to pause mid-recording, the calm before a revelation, and Isaiah Carter, still seated in 2A, prepared to change everything. The silence inside the cabin was so complete it seemed to press against the walls. Even the usual hum of the engines, the faint rattle of overhead compartments, and the rustle of clothes seemed muted. Every eye turned toward Isaiah Carter. Every phone camera angled closer. Isaiah could feel the weight of 1,000 choices resting on his chest. His father's words echoed again. The mantra that had carried him through decades of quiet battles: dignity is your armor. He inhaled deeply, held it, then let it go slowly. He rose from seat 2A. The action itself was enough to draw a collective gasp. For the first time, passengers could see his full presence, tall, steady, not rushed, not defensive. There was a quiet command in his posture. The hoodie that had seemed so out of place now looked deliberate, almost like a uniform of humility. "Ma'am," he said, turning directly to Victoria Hale for the first time with authority in his voice. "I understand you believe this is your seat. I also understand you believe you know who belongs in first class." Victoria blinked, startled by the shift. "That's right," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I do. I have flown this route for 15 years. I know the people who sit here." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Then, perhaps today is a chance to expand what you think you know." He reached down and picked up the leather folder that had been knocked from his bag. He held it carefully, his fingers brushing over its worn edges. Passengers leaned forward. Phones zoomed in. Officer Ruiz straightened, sensing what was about to unfold. Hannah Kim glanced up from her tablet, her mouth parting slightly. Isaiah opened the folder. Inside were neatly clipped papers, a stack of documents stamped with confidential headers. He pulled out a single card and handed it calmly to Ruiz. The officer read it silently. His face shifted almost instantly, first confusion, then realization, then something close to disbelief. He looked up at Isaiah, back at the card, then back again. His lips parted, but no words came out. "Sir," Ruiz finally said, his voice quieter now, "you're—" Isaiah met his gaze, his own voice firm yet calm. "My name is Isaiah Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Atlantic Airlines." The cabin erupted. Gasps filled the air. A woman in 3C dropped her phone onto her lap. The businessman in 1A sat up straighter, his jaw slack. The young man, live streaming in 3B, muttered, "Oh my God," before turning the camera back on Isaiah. The viewer counter leapt upward like a rocket. Victoria's mouth fell open. She stared at Isaiah, then at the officer, then at the card in Ruiz's hand. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. You can't be. You're just—" Her voice faltered. She couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Just a black man in the casual clothes Isaiah finished for her, his voice still calm, though it cut sharper than any accusation. "That is what you mean, isn't it?" Victoria swallowed hard, her confidence unraveling. "I didn't. I just thought." Isaiah closed the folder slowly, his movements deliberate, commanding. "You thought my presence here must be a mistake. You thought my seat must belong to someone else. You thought my appearance defined my worth. You were wrong. Phones caught every word. Comments poured across screens. Plot twist of the year. CEO reveal. She's finished. This man is pure class." Emily Ross, the flight attendant, gripped the seat back nearest her as if steadying herself. Her eyes widened, her training momentarily forgotten. She had spent years serving countless executives in tailored suits, polished shoes, expensive watches. None had revealed themselves like this. Victoria backed a step toward the window, her breathing shallow. I didn't know," she said, her voice small now. "You didn't look like someone who runs an airline," Isaiah asked gently. He shook his head. "That is the problem. Not what I look like, but what you assumed when you looked at me." The hush in the cabin grew heavier. The audience was no longer neutral. They were leaning toward Isaiah, pulled by the gravity of his composure. Isaiah reached into his folder again and withdrew another document. He held it up so passengers and cameras could see the bold letters across the top board of directors. "I was on my way to Chicago for a quarterly board meeting. This is my seat, and this is my airline." The businessman in 1A put down his phone entirely, pressing his hand over his mouth. The woman in 3C whispered, "Unbelievable." Victoria covered her face with her hands. Her body shook as the reality crashed down. She had spent 20 minutes humiliating the man who held ultimate authority over the very company she had invoked as her shield. Isaiah's phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. "Yes, this is Carter. I'm still on the plane. Yes, I'm aware it is trending." He placed the phone on speaker. A crisp female voice filled the cabin. "Mr. Carter, this is Laura Green from Corporate Legal. We've been monitoring social media. The incident is live on multiple platforms. Over 30,000 viewers right now. Major outlets are already posting about it." The passengers collectively inhaled. The entire world was watching. Isaiah nodded slightly. "Thank you. Laura, please prepare a full statement and clear my schedule for the afternoon. We will be implementing immediate reforms." "Yes, sir," came the reply. The line clicked off. Victoria looked around wildly, as if searching for escape. She tried to speak, but no words came. Finally, she managed a strained whisper. I'm sorry." Isaiah regarded her steadily. "Apologies matter, but only when they lead to change. Today, you are not the only one who must reflect. This entire industry must reflect. Because what happened to me happens every day to people without a title to protect them." His words resonated through the cabin, echoing louder than any shout could have. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, some looking at the floor. The truth had landed, undeniable. Isaiah turned back to Officer Ruiz. "Officer, thank you for your professionalism. There is no further issue here, but I would like this moment documented officially. Every witness, every recording, let them stand as evidence, not of my power, but of a system that needs change." Ruiz nodded firmly, his respect clear. "Understood, sir." Isaiah returned to his seat, his movements calm and steady. He gathered his papers from the floor, stacking them neatly. Several passengers bent down to help, their faces full of silent apology. He accepted their assistance with a nod. No more, no less. Victoria sank into seat 2C, her hands trembling. The performance was over. The spotlight she had demanded had turned into a floodlight exposing her prejudice. The departure board blinked again. 4 minutes to take off, but the real journey had already begun. Isaiah opened his laptop. The Wi-Fi connected automatically, an executive privilege. He began typing rapidly, his mind already moving beyond humiliation to transformation. This was no longer just a personal insult. It was an opportunity to rewrite the rules. He paused briefly, glancing at the cabin. Phones still recorded. Faces still stared. His voice carried softly, almost like a benediction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what happened here today is bigger than me, bigger than this flight. It is about dignity and about who we believe deserves it. Remember this moment, because change is coming." The live stream counters surged. 40,000, 50,000. A tidal wave of witnesses to one man's quiet strength. The engines hummed louder as the plane prepared to push back from the gate. But inside the cabin, the real departure had already taken place away from ignorance and toward accountability. The air in the first-class cabin was still electric after Isaiah Carter revealed who he was. Passengers sat frozen between disbelief and awe. Phones remained raised, catching every gesture, every syllable. The tension that had built like a storm for nearly half an hour had broken, and now all eyes waited for what Isaiah would do with the power he had just claimed. Victoria Hale sat stiffly in 2C, her face pale, hands trembling as she clutched the armrest. She avoided the stares of fellow passengers, avoided the cameras that still tracked her every movement. The woman who had strutted through the aisle minutes earlier, dripping confidence and entitlement, now looked small. Isaiah's phone buzzed again. He answered without hesitation, putting it on speaker so the entire cabin could hear. A crisp male voice filled the air. "Mr. Carter, this is Stephen Lowe from Corporate Communications. We're monitoring social media. The incident has already gone viral. First-class racism and Horizon Airlines are trending across multiple platforms. Major outlets have picked it up. There were audible murmurs. The businessman in 1A leaned forward. The young streamer in 3B grinned in disbelief, watching his viewer count soar into the tens of thousands. Isaiah adjusted his laptop screen, his fingers gliding across the keyboard with practiced ease. His voice was calm, clear, and steady. "Thank you. Stephen, I want a draft statement prepared immediately, but more importantly, this is not a PR exercise. We will not simply apologize. We will lead." "Yes, sir," the voice replied, though there was a tremor of surprise. What exactly should we, Isaiah, cut him off gently but firmly? "Start with this: dignity in flight. That will be our campaign. I want it on every channel, every platform, within 48 hours. Budget authorization $75 million over 6 months." A few passengers gasped. The numbers, the decisiveness, the sheer authority, everything felt surreal. Isaiah looked around the cabin, his gaze sweeping slowly across the faces. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here today is not unusual, but it is unacceptable. I have the privilege of a title that shields me. Most people do not. That ends today. His words seemed to land like stones in still water, rippling outward. Even Emily Ross, the flight attendant, found herself blinking back sudden tears. She had seen so many passengers endure humiliation silently, unable to fight back. Seeing someone of power not just defend himself, but broaden the fight, was overwhelming. He turned his attention back to his laptop. Another voice joined the line, this one familiar to several executives in the industry. Mr. Carter, Angela Moreno from Human Resources here. I was asked to join the call. Angela, Isaiah said, his tone warm but businesslike. I want immediate mandatory anti-bias training for every customer-facing employee. All 120,000 of them. Launch in 30 days. Estimated cost. There was a pause. Papers shuffled audibly on the other end. Roughly 43 million. Approved, Isaiah said without hesitation. Document it before we land. Angela hesitated. Sir, major policy changes usually require months of review, board approval, union negotiation. We don't have months, Isaiah interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding. We have 2 hours before this plane touches down in Chicago. And the world is already watching. Move faster. The cabin buzzed again, whispers darting like sparks. Passengers could hardly believe what they were witnessing, a CEO transforming a confrontation into a boardroom, live midair. Victoria shifted uneasily, pressing herself back against the window. Her mind was spinning. He's rewriting the airline right here, and I'm the one who gave him the stage. I did this. I dragged him into the spotlight. Isaiah's voice drew her back. Technology, he said, looking at the tablet in Hannah Kim's hands. Kevin Park from Tech. Are you on the line? Yes, sir, came the voice. I want a real-time bias reporting system built into our app. Passengers should be able to report discrimination instantly, with a guaranteed executive review within 4 hours. Timeline 6 weeks, minimum for full implementation, $18 million. Approved, Isaiah said. I expect beta testing in 3 weeks, and transparency quarterly reports published publicly. Passengers looked at each other, astonished. Phones caught every word. The live stream count leapt again, 70,000, 80. The internet was consuming the transformation in real time. Officer Daniel Ruiz, still standing nearby, found himself drawn in despite years of professional detachment. He had intervened in countless disputes, most petty and forgettable. But this was different. This was history unfolding, and he was standing 3 feet away from it. Isaiah's phone chimed again, and another voice entered. Jennifer Lopez, legal counsel. Here. Jennifer, Isaiah said smoothly. Prepare contract amendments. 0 tolerance for discrimination. First offense, sensitivity training and probation. Second offense, termination. All 50,000 employee contracts must be updated. That will take at least 2 weeks for full legal review. Do it, Isaiah replied. And I want draft language within 72 hours. Passengers whispered again, some covering their mouths in shock. The woman in 3C shook her head in disbelief. This is insane, she whispered to her husband. He's restructuring an airline mid-flight. Isaiah didn't stop. compensation protocols. If a passenger experiences confirmed bias, they receive a full refund and travel credits, no questions asked. Average cost per incident, Jennifer hesitated. $2,000, maybe $2,500. Less than the cost of lawsuits and brand damage, Isaiah said firmly. Implement it. Victoria's head sank lower. Each word felt like a hammer blow. She had wanted to prove her superiority. Instead, she had sparked reforms worth hundreds of millions. Isaiah closed his folder and looked up. His eyes found Victoria's, not cruel, not gloating, simply steady. Ma'am, you said earlier you've flown this route for 15 years. How many times have you witnessed situations like this? Victoria hesitated. Dozens of eyes turned to her. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I've seen them. Yes. And what did you assume at the time? Isaiah asked. Her lips trembled, that the staff was right, that those people didn't belong. Isaiah nodded slowly. And that is the root of the problem. Not malice, not hatred, but assumptions left unchallenged. That ends now. A silence fell again, heavy, reflective. Isaiah tapped his laptop once more, then looked around the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnesses to this moment. Not my humiliation, but our opportunity. Real change will not come from silence or avoidance. It comes from choosing dignity over division, systems over excuses, education over punishment. The businessman in 1A raised his hand slightly. Mr. Carter, if you need outside legal expertise, I'm a civil rights attorney. I'd be honored to assist. Isaiah inclined his head. Thank you. I'll have my team contact you. The engines hummed louder as the plane prepared for departure. Emily Ross moved down the aisle, her step steady but her expression transformed. She looked at Isaiah with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Mr. Carter, she said softly. Thank you. He gave her a small nod. Do your job with dignity, Ms. Ross. That's all the thanks I need. The plane finally pushed back from the gate, 37 minutes delayed. But for everyone on board, time had shifted. What had begun as an ordinary morning flight was now something else entirely, a turning point. Victoria stared out the window, shame radiating from her posture. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, not as a victim of inconvenience, but as a participant in a culture of bias she had never questioned. Isaiah returned to seat 2A, his laptop still open, his voice still steady as he spoke to his executives. We are not responding to a crisis, he told them. We are leading a transformation. The world will measure us by what we do in these next hours. Let's set the standard. Passengers looked on in silence, their faces reflecting awe, discomfort, admiration, and hope. Phones captured it all, sending it out into the digital bloodstream where millions would soon join them as witnesses. For the first time in years, Isaiah felt something more powerful than authority. He felt purpose, and in that quiet, purposeful resolve, a movement was born 30,000 feet in the air. The aircraft leveled into its climb, engines roaring steady as Flight 327 cut through the morning sky. The seatbelt signs were still illuminated, but no one cared. The real spectacle was happening inside the cabin, not outside the windows. Isaiah Carter sat again in 2A, calm, laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting against his steady face. His phone remained on speaker, a chorus of voices from the corporate offices spilling into the cabin. Every passenger listened, their eyes darting between Isaiah, the officers standing by, and the woman who had started it all. Victoria Hale sat frozen in 2C, her shoulders tight, her breathing shallow. Her once bright confidence had drained from her body, leaving only a pale unease. The woman who had claimed she knew who belonged in first class was now staring at the reality that her assumptions had detonated on a stage larger than she could have ever imagined. "Mr. Carter," came the voice of Angela Moreno, head of Human Resources. "If I may, we should carefully consider union negotiations before we announce zero-tolerance policies. Moving too quickly could create backlash from employee associations. They will want their voices heard." Isaiah did not look up from his screen as he typed. "Angela, when was the last time unions threatened strikes over anti-harassment measures?" A pause. "Rarely, sir." "Then they will not strike over measures that protect dignity," Isaiah said, his voice calm but final. "Resistance may come, but I prefer resistance to silence. Pushback is proof that we're moving in the right direction." The businessman in 1A leaned forward slightly, whispering to no one in particular. "That's leadership." Passengers around him nodded subtly. Victoria swallowed, her throat dry. She could feel every camera still pointed in her direction. Her hands twisted together in her lap, her nails pressing into her skin. "Maybe if I apologize, this will fade. Maybe if I own it now, it won't destroy me." But then another thought intruded, colder, sharper. What if the apology isn't enough? What if this becomes my identity, the woman who insulted the CEO? Her stomach tightened. She shifted in her seat, unable to find comfort. Isaiah's phone pinged again. A new voice joined the line, Kevin Park, the Chief Technology Officer. "Mr. Carter, we've begun scoping the reporting system. 6 weeks is aggressive. We may need to cut features." Isaiah finally looked up, his gaze sweeping the cabin before returning to the phone. "Do not cut features. Kevin, cut excuses. I want severity algorithms, multilingual support, escalation protocols, and real-time dashboard access, not just for us, but for regulators. This cannot be another internal tool hidden in a drawer. It must be public, visible, undeniable." "Yes, sir," Kevin said softly. Victoria pressed her hands against her thighs. She wanted to disappear. The cameras, the passengers, the internet, every angle captured her shame. The reality was undeniable. She had underestimated not just a man, but the wrong man. Emily Ross, the flight attendant, approached Isaiah cautiously, still shaken by the whirlwind of events. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, her hands clasped. "Would you like a beverage while you work?" Isaiah looked up, his expression softening slightly. "Water, please, and thank you." Emily nodded quickly, almost gratefully, before hurrying toward the galley. She felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her chest, a mix of admiration and relief. For the first time in her career, she felt like the weight she often carried for silent passengers might be lifted by someone powerful enough to make it last. Isaiah closed his laptop for a moment, leaning back in his seat. His eyes settled on Victoria. "Ma'am," he said, his tone even but resolute, "we need to address what happens next." The cabin fell silent, every ear tilted toward him. Victoria's pulse hammered. She wet her lips, her voice trembling. "Mr. Carter, I never meant." Isaiah held up a hand, stopping her gently but firmly. "Intent is not the issue. Impact is. You demeaned me publicly in front of 30 witnesses and thousands online. What matters now is what you choose to do next." Her breath caught. "Choose yes," Isaiah said. You have two options. You may stand, apologize publicly to everyone here, and acknowledge the assumptions that fueled your actions. Or, he paused, the weight of the word hanging in the air. We document this formally. Your recordings, your words, your actions already streamed live become part of our mandatory training modules. Your frequent flyer status is revoked permanently, and your name becomes an example of how unconscious bias operates. The blood drained from Victoria's face. A murmur ran through the cabin. The businessman in 1A raised his eyebrows. The young streamer in 3B whispered, "Oh, man, this is brutal." Victoria's mind spun. She could feel the walls closing in, the pressure of a decision she didn't want to make. Her pride screamed to resist, to argue, to insist she had been misunderstood. But another voice, small, buried, but growing, whispered of humility, of survival, of the possibility of growth she had long resisted. Her lips quivered. She looked around at the cabin. Dozens of eyes stared back, some cold, some sympathetic, all expectant. She rose slowly to her feet, trembling. I want to apologize," she said, her voice cracking, "to Mr. Carter, to the staff, and to every passenger here. I made assumptions, ugly, prejudiced assumptions based on appearance. That was wrong, deeply wrong. I am ashamed." The cabin was silent for a moment, then whispers rippled softly. Some passengers nodded, some frowned, but the weight of her words lingered. Isaiah regarded her quietly, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded once. "Apology accepted. But let me be clear, this is not forgiveness without accountability. Growth requires both." Victoria sat heavily, her face burning. Tears stung her eyes. She wanted to vanish into the seat cushion, but somewhere deep inside, she felt the first uncomfortable stirrings of truth. Isaiah reopened his laptop, his voice carried across the cabin, measured, unflinching. "This apology is a beginning, not an ending. Real change will require more than words. That is why today, in this cabin, we commit to systemic reform." He glanced at the phone, still on speaker. "Angela, Kevin, Jennifer, are you all still on yes, sir?" came the chorus. "Then hear this clearly. By the time this plane lands in Chicago, we will have documented and initiated the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in the industry. Cost is irrelevant. Speed is essential. Accountability is mandatory." The passengers exchanged looks again. They had boarded a routine morning flight. Now they were watching the foundation of a revolution being built at 30,000 feet. Emily returned with a glass of water, her hands trembling as she set it down carefully. Isaiah gave her a small nod of thanks. She lingered a moment, then whispered, "Sir, whatever happens, please know some of us have been waiting for this for a long time." Isaiah met her eyes. "Then let's make it last." He lifted the water, sipped, and turned back to his laptop. His fingers resumed their steady rhythm on the keys. His calm voice once again filled the cabin as he spoke to his executives. "Let us ensure this is remembered not as a scandal, but as a turning point." And with that, the choice was sealed not just for Victoria Hale, but for the airline, for its employees, and for every passenger who would step onto its planes in the years to come. The plane had settled into a steady cruise above the clouds, but the atmosphere inside the cabin felt anything but steady. The world was now watching tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of people, phones glowing, hearts racing, eyes fixed on the quiet drama unfolding in Seat 2A, Isaiah Carter rested his hands on the armrest, shoulders relaxed, though his mind churned beneath the calm surface. He had led mergers worth billions, had commanded boardrooms full of hostile investors. But this felt different. This was raw, unfiltered, public. There was no chance to polish, no chance to spin. Every word he spoke, every breath, every flicker of expression was being streamed to an audience larger than some of his company's annual shareholder meetings. Stay calm, he told himself. This isn't about me. It's about dignity. If I make it personal, I lose the larger fight. A voice broke his train of thought. It was the young man in 3B, phone still propped up for his live stream. Mr. Carter, we're at 300,000 live viewers. Twitter's blowing up. You're trending worldwide. Gasps rippled across the cabin. A woman in 4A whispered to her husband, "This is history. We're literally watching history." Victoria Hale sat rigid in 2C, staring straight ahead, her nails digging into her palms. Every new announcement about the live stream numbers felt like another nail in the coffin of the life she had known. She had been someone important in her own circles, proud of her status and her career. Now she was a symbol the wrong kind. Her thoughts spun wildly. Maybe I'll be fired. Maybe my clients will leave me. Maybe I'll never walk into an airport again without someone pointing. The shame pressed in until it was suffocating. Yet beneath it, a small, nagging truth gnawed at her. This is my fault. No one forced me to say what I said. I thought I was superior. I thought I knew better. And now, everyone knows what I really am. Isaiah leaned forward, placing his laptop on the tray table. He spoke again, not just to his executives still patched into the call, but to the passengers, to the cameras, to the invisible millions watching through glowing screens. This is not just an airline problem, he said, his voice even. It is a human problem. When assumptions replace empathy, dignity is lost. When silence replaces accountability, injustice thrives. But when truth is recorded, when witnesses refuse to look away, change becomes possible. The businessman in 1A shifted forward, visibly moved. He whispered, "That's the speech of a statesman, not a CEO." The passengers knew they were part of something bigger now. Even those who had initially rolled their eyes at the delay now sat upright, rapt, as if they were attending a lecture that would be quoted for years to come. The phone speaker crackled. It was Angela Moreno again. "Mr. Carter, media outlets are already requesting official comment. CNN, BBC, Reuters. Do we respond mid-flight?" Isaiah thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes. Release a statement. Horizon Airlines recognizes the seriousness of what occurred aboard Flight 327. We are implementing immediate, systemic reforms under direct leadership of our CEO, Isaiah Carter. This moment will not be brushed aside. It will define us. Keep it short, clear, resolute. Yes, sir." The streamer in 3B grinned. Oh man, they just tweeted it. Look, it's blowing up. Isaiah's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. He felt the familiar weight of leadership pressing down harder than usual. The difference this time was that there would be no quarterly report to hide behind. No investor call to absorb the scrutiny. This was immediate, global, and unrelenting. For a fleeting moment, his thoughts drifted inward. What if I stumble? What if I say the wrong thing? He imagined his late father, a man who had worked maintenance at the very airline Isaiah now led. His father's voice echoed in memory. "Son, you don't have to be the loudest man in the room, just the clearest." Isaiah straightened. The doubt quieted. Clarity returned. He spoke again, softer now, but the microphones picked up every word. My father worked in baggage handling. My mother cleaned offices at night. They taught me that dignity does not depend on the seat you sit in, but the respect you give and receive. Today, in this cabin, we choose to rebuild that respect for everyone who flies with us. A hush swept the cabin. A woman in 3C wiped her eyes. Emily Ross, the flight attendant, felt a lump rising in her throat. She had spent years watching indignities play out against passengers who had no voice. Now, she watched her CEO, disguised in a hoodie just minutes ago, use his power not to shield himself but to open doors for everyone else. Victoria turned toward him slowly. Her voice was faint, but it carried in the silence. Why? Why offer me a chance to apologize? Why not just punish me? Isaiah regarded her quietly, then answered with a calm weight that stilled even the live stream comments. Because punishment alone does not create change. It creates fear. But when people confront the truth of their own prejudice, when they face the consequences yet are given the chance to grow, that is when transformation happens. Victoria lowered her eyes, shame burning her cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt not powerful, but painfully human. The phone speaker chimed again. This time it was Jennifer Lopez from Legal. Mr. Carter, your directives will expose us to costs exceeding $200 million over the next 18 months. The board may resist. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Then let the board resist. They will answer to shareholders when they explain why they chose short-term savings over long-term survival. This is not a cost, it is an investment, in trust, in dignity, in our future. The cabin stirred again, whispers passing like waves. The young man in 3B turned his phone toward himself briefly. Chad, you're hearing this. He's literally rewriting corporate policy mid-air. This is wild. The live stream viewer count passed 500,000. Isaiah looked around at the passengers. You're not just witnesses, you are participants. Each of you has recorded, spoken, challenged, or chosen silence. What you do with this moment matters. Change is not born from CEOs alone. It is born from communities demanding more. He let the words hang, heavy and true. Victoria stared at him, her throat tight, a strange mixture of fear, guilt, and something she had never expected respect gnawed at her. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her worst moment could become a starting point instead of an ending. Isaiah turned back to his laptop. His voice steadied once more. Team, I want Phase 1 reforms drafted within this flight. HR training in 30 days, reporting app in 6 weeks, public quarterly transparency, passenger compensation, and I want it in writing before we land. The phone voices responded in unison, subdued but determined. Understood, sir. The businessman in 1A leaned back, exhaling slowly. Gentlemen and ladies, we just witnessed history. No one disagreed. Above the clouds, Flight 327 carried more than passengers. It carried the weight of a new future, forged from conflict, carried by dignity, and broadcast live to a world desperate for proof that change was possible. And at the center of it all sat a man in a hoodie, calm, unshaken, reshaping an industry not with anger, but with quiet, relentless clarity. The hum of the engines was steady, a deep and constant vibration running through the fuselage, But inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere felt charged with invisible electricity. Flight 327 was no longer just a journey from New York to Chicago. It was a stage, and the audience now spanned continents. Isaiah Carter kept his gaze steady on the laptop screen, the faint reflection of passenger faces dancing across the glass. Notifications kept popping up faster than he could read, mentions in the hundreds of thousands, headlines already forming. Every cable network had shifted its morning programming to cover the breaking drama in the sky. Emily Ross, standing near the galley, whispered to another attendant, "I've never seen anything like this. It's like the whole world is sitting in this cabin with us." The young man in 3B turned his phone to show the growing numbers. "We're at 800,000 live viewers. TikTok's chopping up clips already. Seat 2A is number 1 worldwide." Victoria Hale flinched at the hashtag. She could almost feel it attaching itself to her name, clinging to her reputation like a parasite. Her hands shook in her lap. She wanted to cry but forced the tears down, her pride unwilling to let her break entirely in front of strangers. How did I become the villain in a global morality play? Isaiah's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Calm, deliberate, firm. Team, I need confirmation on timelines. HR, 30 days for mandatory training. Technology, 6 weeks for reporting app. Legal, 2 weeks for zero-tolerance implementation. Marketing, campaign rollout in 48 hours. Angela Moreno responded first, her voice steady though edged with urgency. "We're drafting the training framework already, sir. Content will be reviewed by external experts. It won't be window dressing, it will be substantive." Kevin Park chimed in. "Engineering has spun up a prototype branch. We'll have wireframes for you before landing," Jennifer Lopez added. "I'm revising contracts tonight. Unions may challenge, but we'll anchor it under federal anti-discrimination statutes." Isaiah nodded. "Good. Keep moving." The businessman in 1A, who had stopped recording long ago, leaned closer toward Isaiah. "Mr. Carter, may I say something as a passenger, not a lawyer?" Isaiah glanced at him. "Go ahead." The man gestured around. "Everyone here, whether they know it or not, is going to tell this story for the rest of their lives. Some will tell it at dinner tables. Some will tell it in classrooms. Some will tell it on news broadcasts. What you're building now, it isn't just company policy, it's living memory." Isaiah absorbed the words quietly, then gave a single nod. "Then we must make sure the memory is worth carrying." The live stream comments, scrolling too fast to follow, were full of both fury and hope. Some called for Victoria to be banned permanently. Others praised Isaiah's composure. Still others demanded industry-wide reform beyond Horizon Airlines. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt the weight of strangers' voices pressed directly against her chest. Not colleagues, not friends, not family, strangers, millions of them, and nearly all condemning her. A voice in her mind hissed, "Run, hide, deny." But another voice, smaller but stubborn, whispered, "Face it, learn from it, transform." Her hands clenched in her lap. Isaiah turned slightly toward her. His tone was not sharp, not scornful, simply steady. "Ms. Hale, earlier, you asked why I offered you a choice instead of punishment. I will tell you why again. Because our industry has spent too long hiding bias under the rug, punishing individuals while ignoring the systems that create them. I will not repeat that mistake. You may have caused harm today, but you can also help repair it if you're willing." Every head in the cabin turned. Passengers inhaled sharply. Even the live stream chat slowed for a moment, sensing the pivot. Victoria's lips parted, but no words came out. Isaiah continued, "I am establishing a passenger equity advisory council, not composed of executives, not composed of celebrities, but of real travelers, some harmed by bias, some guilty of it, some willing to speak honestly about it. You could serve there, not as absolution, as responsibility." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Emily nearly dropped the glass of water she was holding. Victoria's throat tightened. Shame fought with disbelief. He wants me, the woman who humiliated him, to help fix what I broke. Her voice cracked. You would really want me on something like that." After what I did, Isaiah's eyes did not waver, especially because of what you did. Real reform requires uncomfortable honesty. You've already revealed the bias that most people bury. Now you must decide if you'll keep burying it or help confront it. The businessman in 1A shook his head slowly. "Unbelievable," he muttered, not in disapproval, but in awe. The cabin was silent for a beat. Then the young woman in 3C whispered loudly enough for all to hear, That's powerful." Victoria lowered her face into her hands. For the first time since the confrontation began, the tears came freely. Hot, humiliating, but strangely cleansing. Isaiah did not gloat. He did not press. He simply returned to his laptop, his steady composure radiating through the cabin. On the phone, Lisa Thompson from marketing broke the silence. "Mr. Carter, CNN is running with our preliminary statement. Headlines read, 'CEO confronts bias mid-flight, orders industry reform in real time.' It's gaining traction." Isaiah gave the faintest hint of a smile. "Then let's make sure reality is even more compelling than the headlines." The cabin relaxed slightly, though no one fully exhaled. Everyone knew the storm outside the storm of cameras, tweets, breaking news, late-night talk monologues was only beginning. But they also knew they had just witnessed something unusual, a leader choosing dignity over vengeance, systems over scapegoats. Victoria lifted her face slowly, eyes red but expression changed. For the first time that morning, her pride gave way to something fragile but honest humility. The engines droned on, carrying Flight 327 through the sky. But inside, the world had shifted. The seatbelt sign glowed softly above the cabin, though no one seemed to notice. Flight 327 had settled into cruise altitude, but the air inside the first-class cabin felt dense, as though the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressed down. Phones buzzed constantly with notifications, hashtags multiplied. Every few minutes, someone whispered a new viewer count. Isaiah Carter leaned back slightly in seat 2A, his laptop open but his posture composed. Calmness, he knew, was contagious. If he betrayed anxiety, the cabin would absorb it. If he radiated steadiness, others would find it easier to hold themselves upright. Angela Moreno's voice came through the phone speaker, tight but measured. "Mr. Carter, I need to report. The board is in uproar. Several members are demanding an emergency call. They want to rein in your directives, citing overreach and unauthorized expenditures." The businessman in 1A muttered, "Of course, money before morals." Isaiah's jaw flexed once, then stilled. "Patch them in. Let them say their piece here, where witnesses can see what kind of leadership they stand for." Gasps fluttered across the cabin. A live board confrontation, mid-flight, broadcast through phones already streaming. No one had seen anything like it. The call shifted, and a chorus of voices filled the speaker. Board member Thomas Whitfield came in first, his tone sharp. "Isaiah, what are you doing? Approving 9-figure expenditures without formal process. You can't unilaterally rewrite corporate policy from an airplane cabin." Another voice, Eleanor Briggs, added coldly, "This looks reckless. Investors will panic. We need containment, not escalation." Isaiah waited until they finished. His silence alone pulled the attention of every passenger. Finally, he spoke, even and unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, let me be clear. Containment is no longer possible. The world has already judged us. Our choice is whether to rise with integrity or sink with denial. Which future do you prefer to face shareholders with Whitfield snapped back? Our fiduciary duty is to protect value, not grandstand for social media." Isaiah's calm did not falter. "You mistake this as grandstanding? It is survival. 70% of our revenue comes from business travelers. Do you think they'll stay loyal when their employees see clips of this incident and wonder if they're next? Protecting dignity is protecting value." The woman in 3C clapped once, unable to hold back. Others murmured in agreement. On the live stream, comments flew. CEO bodied his board, live. "This is legendary. Protect this man at all costs." Isaiah let the noise fade, then delivered the blow. "If any of you believe shareholders would rather see us lose billions in lawsuits, lose market trust, and lose global reputation, then vote me out. But do it openly. Explain to the world why you fired your CEO for defending basic human dignity." Silence. The board members had no quick retort. Angela's voice cut in softly. "Mr. Carter, internal chat is lighting up. Employees across the network are already posting solidarity messages. Pilots, gate agents, flight attendants, they're rallying behind you." Isaiah exhaled, a small release of tension. Then he looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of passengers one by one. There it is. Change doesn't come from a unanimous boardroom. It comes when people, ordinary people, demand more. He turned to Victoria Hale. And it comes when those who once caused harm choose responsibility instead of retreat. Victoria's pulse pounded. She felt as though every eye in the world was on her, and maybe they were. Shame burned, but alongside it, a flicker of resolve stirred. She swallowed hard. Her voice was soft, trembling, but audible. I will do it. I'll serve on your council, not because I deserve redemption, but because I need to face what I did, and maybe help stop others from repeating it." A collective murmur filled the cabin. Some passengers looked surprised. Others nodded approvingly. Emily Ross, standing near the galley, felt tears prick her eyes. The businessman in 1A leaned toward her. "That's the first wise thing I've heard you say today," he said, not unkindly. Victoria's face flushed crimson, but she didn't look away this time. For the first time all morning, she met Isaiah's gaze without defiance. Isaiah inclined his head once, a subtle acknowledgement. "Then let us hold you to your word." The phone crackled again. Kevin Park, the CTO, spoke urgently. "Mr. Carter, the prototype reporting app is already trending internally. Engineers leaked the concept on Slack. Employees are calling it the dignity button. It's going viral." Isaiah's lips twitched faintly, the closest thing to a smile he had shown. Then we lean into it, market it that way. Simple, human, a button for dignity. Lisa Thompson's voice followed. We can craft the campaign Press for Dignity, visuals, social rollout, corporate partners. We'll need budget approved, Isaiah said before she could finish. Passengers chuckled softly at the swiftness. One whispered, "This man runs a company like he breathes." Meanwhile, the live stream counter ticked higher, 900,000, then 1 million. Screenshots flew across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Headlines screamed CEO battles his own board midair. For a brief moment, Isaiah let himself close his eyes. Behind the composure, fatigue gnawed at him. His heart ached with the weight of responsibility. Am I enough for this? Can one man truly shift an industry? Or will the system swallow me too? He heard his father's voice again, quiet, steady. "Son, leadership isn't about carrying the weight alone. It's about teaching others to lift with you." Isaiah opened his eyes. Resolve hardened once more. He spoke into the cabin, voice strong. This is no longer about one seat, or one passenger, or one company. It is about an industry and perhaps a society that must decide whether dignity is optional or essential. I say it is essential. What say you? The businessman in 1A rose to his feet, clapping firmly. The woman in 3C followed. Soon, the entire first-class cabin was applauding, some with tears, some with smiles, all with conviction. Even Victoria, still trembling, brought her hands together slowly, awkwardly, but sincerely. The live stream comments exploded. Stand-in ovation mid-flight. Never seen anything like this. This is history. Isaiah did not bask in it. He simply inclined his head again, acknowledging the moment without claiming it as his own. The engines droned on, steady and indifferent, carrying them closer to Chicago. But everyone on Flight 327 knew the real destination had already changed. They were heading toward a future reshaped in real time. In the thin air above the clouds, where resistance met resolve and dignity refused to yield. The hours in the sky stretched longer than the passengers expected, but not because of turbulence or weather. The real storm had already passed through the cabin, leaving behind a charged silence mixed with relief, exhaustion, and something none of them had felt at the start of the flight, cautious hope. Isaiah Carter sat forward in seat 2A, shoulders straight, his laptop perched open on the tray. The glow of the screen illuminated the determined lines of his face. Around him, the passengers had settled into a quieter rhythm. Phones still buzzed with live notifications, but the frenzy of earlier had softened into something steadier, like a heartbeat pacing itself for the long haul. The board members had gone silent after their failed pushback. A few had even disconnected abruptly, unwilling to stay on a call that had turned against them. Only Angela, Kevin, Jennifer, and Lisa remained, their voices steady as they outlined the first steps toward the reforms Isaiah had demanded. "Mr. Carter," Angela reported. "The 30-day training directive has already been circulated to regional HR heads. Some are balking at the timeline, but most are calling it overdue. I'm seeing unexpected support from mid-level managers. They've wanted this for years." Kevin's voice came next. "The engineers are running with the dignity button idea. It's become a rallying cry internally. Our Slack channels are blowing up. Employees are suggesting features, offering to beta test. This might launch sooner than 6 weeks." Lisa chimed in, "We've got preliminary campaign assets drafted. #Han Press for Dignity is trending, and influencers are begging to join. The message is simple, human, and powerful. Our ad team hasn't seen momentum like this in a decade. Isaiah absorbed their words. A part of him felt a flicker of relief, but another part remained restless. He knew the beginning of reform was always the easiest part. The real challenge came months later, when attention faded and habits reasserted themselves. Would they stay the course when the world stopped watching? He glanced across the aisle. Victoria Hale sat rigidly in 2C, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but there was a new steadiness in her gaze. She was listening to every word, not out of defiance anymore, but out of something deeper accountability. For the first time, she spoke without prompting. If I'm going to serve on your council, I don't want to be a figurehead. I want to face the people I hurt, employees, passengers. I want them to see me and ask their hardest questions. If I can't handle that, I don't belong there. Isaiah studied her for a moment. The cabin leaned in, the passengers sensing another turning point. Finally, he nodded. Then that will be your first task. Listening, not talking. Listening. Victoria lowered her head in agreement. The businessman in 1A exhaled softly, as though a weight had finally lifted. That's what accountability looks like, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Meanwhile, in the back of the cabin, murmurs spread through economy class. Word had traveled down the aisle despite the curtains meant to separate them. Passengers craned their necks, whispering updates they'd seen on their screens. A teenager leaned across the row to his mother. "Mom, the CEO's literally up there changing the whole airline right now." On this plane. The mother shook her head in disbelief. "Remember this. You'll tell your kids about it someday." The captain's voice broke over the intercom, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Olivia Martinez. We'll begin our descent into Chicago in about 20 minutes. On behalf of the crew, I thank you for your patience today. We know this hasn't been a typical flight. History rarely is." The words drew a quiet chuckle from the cabin. Isaiah closed his laptop at last and stood, his tall frame commanding quiet without effort. He looked around the cabin, meeting every gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice resonant but gentle, "you've witnessed something rare today. Not just conflict, but transformation. What began as humiliation became responsibility. What began as anger became opportunity. I cannot promise perfection, but I can promise progress." The passengers listened, rapt. Even those who had started the flight indifferent now felt the gravity of his words. He continued, "I want you all to know your presence here matters. Your recordings, your posts, your voices, they've forced a reckoning. And when this story fades from the headlines, remember, change doesn't live in one man's decision. It lives in the choices we all make when no one is watching." The businessman in 1A started to clap again, slower this time, more reverent. Others followed, until the cabin was filled with applause, not explosive, but steady, like a heartbeat. Isaiah sat down, exhaustion finally catching him, but inside his chest he felt something close to peace. For once, he believed his father's voice was right. Leadership was never about the spotlight. It was about what came after. The plane dipped gently as it began descent. Passengers adjusted their seats, some still filming, some simply watching with eyes wide. Victoria stared out the window at the clouds breaking below, wondering how her life would look when she stepped off this plane. She had entered as a woman sure of her entitlement. She would leave as a woman branded with her shame, but perhaps also with a chance to rebuild. Isaiah leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the hum of the engines steady his heartbeat. The reforms were no longer ideas. They were actions already in motion, and once in motion, momentum was hard to stop. When the landing gear dropped, rattle in the floor, the passengers braced for touchdown, but they knew in their bones what had taken off on this flight was far larger than the jet itself. It was a movement. Chicago's skyline glimmered beneath a pale morning haze as Flight 327 touched down. Tires screeched against the runway, and the cabin shook briefly before settling into its deceleration. But no one inside the plane felt the usual relief of landing. They were still suspended in the extraordinary gravity of what had unfolded above the clouds. The passengers of first class remained unusually quiet, their faces thoughtful. Phones were still in their hands, but fewer people were posting. Instead, they were processing. The realization had begun to sink in. They had not just witnessed history, they had become part of it. Isaiah Carter powered down his laptop. The reforms he had ordered midair were already echoing across corporate intranets, Slack channels, and news feeds. Yet his mind churned with something deeper, the danger of momentum lost. If we let today fade into spectacle, it will become a story, not a standard. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, Emily Ross leaned toward him. "Sir," she whispered, her voice soft but insistent, "the crew has been talking. We've seen bias before. We've seen colleagues target passengers unfairly. Usually, nothing happens. Today, everything happened. Thank you." Isaiah gave her a small nod. "Don't thank me. Thank the people who documented, who refused to stay silent. Change begins with those who refuse to look away." Victoria Hale overheard, her cheeks flushing again. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Yet she didn't shrink this time. She let the sting remind her of the weight she had to carry. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin erupted into movement. Passengers stood, pulling down bags, murmuring about connections, yet none rushed out. They lingered, aware they were exiting not just a plane but a moment destined for textbooks, boardrooms, maybe even legislative hearings. At the gate, the scene was surreal. Cameras lined the terminal windows, reporters jostled, microphones ready. The news had spread faster than the jet could fly. "Mr. Carter," a journalist shouted as the door opened. "Can you confirm sweeping reforms have been authorized already?" Another called out, "Is it true board members tried to block you mid-flight?" Isaiah paused at the threshold, looked back at the passengers who had witnessed everything, then faced the cameras. His voice carried the same quiet command as it had in the cabin. "Yes, we authorized reforms before landing. Yes, there was resistance. But what matters is not the conflict, it's the commitment. We will show that dignity is not a luxury. It is the baseline for air travel. Horizon Airlines will lead this industry into a new era." Applause broke out not just from reporters but from passengers stepping into the terminal behind him. Their clapping echoed down the concourse, captured instantly on live streams. By the time Isaiah entered the black SUV waiting outside, news chyrons had already changed CEO, "Dignity is the baseline." Press for Dignity campaign announced. Inside the vehicle, Lisa Thompson patched through a call. "Isaiah, you need to see this. United just issued a statement. They're reviewing their own bias training. Delta is holding an emergency exec session this afternoon. Regulators are calling your office asking for briefing materials, Kevin added. FAA officials want a meeting within 72 hours. They're considering making bias reporting mandatory for all airlines. Isaiah let out a slow breath. Good. Then let them know Horizon will not just comply, we'll help design the framework. Angela's voice carried an edge of awe. Sir, in less than 4 hours, we've shifted the industry's center of gravity. Everyone's looking at us now. He leaned back against the leather seat. Then let's show them what leadership looks like. But beneath the steel of his words, doubt whispered, what if it's too much, too fast? What if we stumble, and all they see is failure? Isaiah clenched his hands briefly, grounding himself. His father's voice returned like a compass. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's carrying the fear into the fight anyway. That evening, a press conference was hastily arranged in downtown Chicago. The hotel ballroom overflowed with journalists, employees, advocacy leaders, and curious citizens. Cameras flashed as Isaiah took the podium. He wore the same hoodie and slacks he'd boarded with deliberately unpolished, a visual reminder of the assumptions that had sparked everything. He began quietly, forcing the room to lean in. This morning, on Flight 327, I was told I did not belong in my own seat. Not because of my ticket, not because of my behavior, because of assumptions. Assumptions rooted in bias. He let the words hang. No one shifted. Some of you might say this was a single incident, an anomaly. But I ask you, how many anomalies does it take before we admit there is a pattern? How many passengers have been humiliated without cameras rolling, without live streams, without the power of a CEO title to protect them? Murmurs rippled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Isaiah's voice grew firmer. Let me be clear. Airlines do not sell seats. We sell trust. Every boarding pass is a contract that says you will be treated with dignity from gate to gate. Break that, and no miles, no lounges, no fleets can save you. Applause erupted. Some employees in uniform clapped hardest, their pride visible. He raised a hand for quiet. That is why Horizon has already approved the most comprehensive anti-bias initiative in aviation history. 30-day mandatory training for every customer-facing employee. A 6-week rollout of our reporting app, the Dignity button, a zero-tolerance policy with real consequences, public quarterly reports, transparent accountability. These are not proposals. They are commitments. Reporters shouted questions, but Isaiah pressed forward. And we will not stand alone. Other airlines are already watching. Regulators are asking questions. This will not be a Horizon program. It will be an industry standard. Because dignity should not depend on which logo is painted on the tail of your plane. The applause, this time, was thunderous. In the back of the room, Victoria Hale sat with her hands folded tightly. She had insisted on attending, even against her instincts. Hearing her own actions reframed on a global stage twisted her stomach. Yet, for the first time, she wanted the twisting. It was the pain of growth, Isaiah concluded, his voice quiet again, but weighted with resolve. We are entering a new era of flight, not one defined by speed or comfort, but by respect. Because if the skies cannot be safe for dignity, then they are not safe at all. When he stepped away from the podium, the room erupted again. Headlines flashed across live feeds within seconds. Horizon CEO declares dignity new standard. We sell trust, not seats. Back at Horizon headquarters, Board member Thomas Whitfield watched the broadcast grimly. "He's rewriting the playbook," he muttered. Eleanor Briggs replied, "And people are cheering for it. We might not like it, but he's winning." Employees across the network shared clips, adding captions, "Proud to work here today." Finally, someone said it. "Press for dignity." By midnight, the campaign hashtag had surpassed 12 million mentions. Influencers outside the aviation world picked it up. Musicians, athletes, civil rights organizations. A late-night talk show host quipped, "Apparently, the Mile High Club now includes social justice." The audience roared. Isaiah watched none of it. In his hotel room, he sat quietly with a glass of water, staring at the city lights. Exhaustion pressed on his shoulders, but so did something else: conviction. The battle had only begun, but for the first time he felt the tide turning. He whispered into the quiet, as though speaking to his absent father, "We're lifting. Dad, not just planes, people." 6 months later, the headquarters of Horizon Airlines pulsed with a different kind of energy. The glass-walled boardroom no longer felt like the place of confrontation it had once been. Screens lined the walls, displaying dashboards filled with metrics, testimonials, and live updates from airports around the world. Isaiah Carter stood at the head of the long oak table. Jacket off, sleeves rolled. He no longer looked like a man defending his right to sit in 2A. He looked like a man who had harnessed a storm and redirected it into a tailwind. Angela Moreno presented first. As of this morning, 98% of our 127,000 employees have completed the dignity training. Post-training assessments show a 75% improvement in recognizing unconscious bias scenarios. More importantly, voluntary employee reporting of misconduct has risen 400%. People feel empowered to speak up. Applause rippled through the room. Isaiah's expression remained steady, but pride glimmered in his eyes. Kevin Park switched the screen to a real-time map. The Dignity button has processed 12,350 reports in its first 6 months. Average response time is under 3 hours. Resolution rate, 96%. And here's the kicker: customer retention for passengers who reported an incident but saw it resolved jumped to 94%. Jennifer Lopez leaned forward. "On the legal side, we've avoided potential class actions. Instead, we've been praised by regulators. FAA officials are drafting new standards modeled directly on our framework. The EU has reached out for consultation. The International Civil Aviation Organization wants to explore global adoption." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. This wasn't just corporate success, it was industry transformation. Lisa Thompson took the floor. The Press for Dignity campaign has logged over 2 billion impressions worldwide. More than a slogan, it's become a cultural reference. Late-night hosts joke about it. Civil rights leaders endorse it. Our stock price is up 17% in 6 months, and more importantly, public sentiment has shifted. People trust us again. Isaiah let the information settle. Numbers mattered. But he never forgot what they represented: people who had been spared humiliation, employees who no longer looked away, passengers who walked onto planes believing dignity was their right. He spoke quietly, the way he always did when the moment was most important. This isn't just ROI. This is a return on humanity. We've proven that treating people with respect is not only moral, it's profitable. Other industries are calling. Banks, hotels, hospitals. They want to adopt what we've built. The room buzzed again, and then, from the back, a hand rose. It was Victoria Hale. Her presence still startled some board members. 6 months earlier, she had been the epicenter of humiliation. Now she sat as the chair of the Passenger Equity Advisory Council, her once arrogant posture replaced with quiet humility. She carried herself not with entitlement, but with resolve. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice steady. "The Council has conducted 30 listening sessions with passengers who experienced bias. We've compiled feedback from more than 2,000 individuals. Many still carry scars, but they told us something remarkable. They finally believe their voices matter. They believe the system will not silence them anymore. That belief is priceless." Isaiah nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Hale." She met his eyes, not with shame now, but with gratitude. "I was the problem once. You turned me into part of the solution. I'll never stop working to earn that chance." Silence fell. For many in the room, her words carried more weight than the statistics. They were proof that change could reach even the heart of bias itself. Later that evening, Isaiah stood before a packed auditorium at the NAACP National Conference. 3,000 people filled the hall. Cameras streamed live across networks and platforms. The stage screen behind him projected 3 words in bold press for dignity. He began simply, "A year ago, I was told to leave my seat, not because of my ticket, not because of my behavior, but because of my skin and my clothes. That humiliation could have ended in anger. Instead, it became the beginning of transformation." The crowd erupted in applause, but Isaiah lifted his hand for quiet. Today, discrimination complaints on Horizon flights are down 67%. Passenger satisfaction is up 25%. Employee morale is higher than it's ever been, but those numbers don't tell the full story. The real success is in the quiet moments. No one records the flight attendant who pauses before making an assumption, the gate agent who asks twice instead of acting once, the passenger who feels dignity where once they felt doubt. He paused, scanning the faces before him. "This isn't about me. It's about us. It's about proving that our worst moments can become our greatest catalysts. It's about refusing to let division define us when dignity can unite us." The crowd rose, clapping and cheering, the sound reverberating through the hall. Isaiah continued, his voice steady, resolute. "The skies belong to all of us, and if they are not safe for dignity, they are not safe at all. Horizon has changed, yes, but more importantly, the industry has changed, and together we can carry this change into every corner of our society. Because dignity doesn't stop at the boarding gate. It belongs in every workplace, every classroom, every community." The audience thundered to its feet again, a standing ovation that seemed endless. Off stage, Victoria Hale wiped her eyes as she listened. She had become a living symbol of what accountability and growth could look like. That night, she would be announced as the new director of passenger equity at a major airline outside Horizon. Her transformation complete. When Isaiah stepped down from the podium, a journalist asked him one final question. "Mr. Carter, what's the ultimate lesson of Flight 327? He thought for a moment, then answered softly but firmly. "That real power isn't in taking revenge. It's in building systems that make revenge unnecessary. Power isn't a seat in first class. Power is making sure everyone feels they belong, no matter the seat they're in." The quote traveled faster than any press release, splashed across headlines, replayed on broadcasts, immortalized in hashtags. Weeks later, the numbers continued climbing. 12 major airlines had adopted Horizon's framework. 34 international aviation authorities had implemented bias reporting systems. Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton taught the Flight 327 case study and leadership courses. Employees across the industry spoke of a new culture. And yet, Isaiah knew the work was never finished. One evening, back in his office overlooking the city skyline, he reread an email from a young black engineer who had flown Horizon after the reforms. It said simply, "For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in the sky." Isaiah closed the email, leaned back, and allowed himself a rare smile. The revolution had begun with an insult and a laptop bag shoved aside. It had become a global movement because people chose dignity over silence, systems over revenge, growth over shame. As night fell, Isaiah whispered again into the quiet, the way he had on the day of the flight. "We're lifting, Dad, not just planes, people." And so, from one seat on one flight, a revolution was born. What started as humiliation became hope. What began as arrogance turned into accountability. And one man's calm refusal to surrender his dignity reshaped an entire industry. Isaiah Carter proved that power isn't in shouting the loudest. It's in building systems where no one ever has to shout again. Victoria Hale's transformation reminded us that even those who cause harm can choose growth, if given the courage to face their own reflection. And every witness with a phone reminded the world that silence is complicity. But documentation is justice. The skies will never be the same. But the lesson stretches far beyond the aisle of an airplane. Every interaction is a chance to choose dignity over division. Every one of us carries that choice. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about the world we live in and the world we want to build, show your support. Like this video, share it to keep the conversation alive, and subscribe to our channel for more stories where dignity wins and justice takes flight. The journey doesn't end here. It only begins with us.